It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Deborah Duong. And yeah, Debbie has been working on application of AI and simulation modeling to a variety of complex, mostly human systems for a number of decades now. I mean, she got a degree in the Computational Social Science and complex systems modeling from PhD from George Mason University, and has been working on applications for various U.S. government agencies as well as other areas of industry, like the health insurance industry, with combining AI with complex simulation models. And one of her special focuses has been on simulation models where the agents in the model are not as simple as in a typical agent-based simulation, but the agents actually have some intelligence and are able to learn and can even develop sort of cultural patterns of interaction among each other. And I think that paradigm of agent-based simulation with agents that can learn and can relate and form cultural groups, I think this is going to be very important going forward for doing modeling of COVID-19 and its spread through our complex societies in the next phase. So yeah, Debbie and I actually worked together in DC way back when, 15, 20 years ago, and we've been working together within SingularityNet more recently. So what she's going to talk about now is some of her thinking both about agent-based simulation modeling and about how to use AI to gather data to feed into the simulation models. And I think that's enough introduction. Take it away, Debbie.
Thank you, Ben. Can you see me?
I can hear you too.
Okay, great. Okay, so I wanted to start with what we actually want to accomplish with these studies. And what we really want to do is to develop COVID policy. We want to use the principles of complex adaptive systems to learn how to fight COVID. And I'm going to talk about how we might use an agent-based model to do that. We want to look at policy or prescriptions for how to handle events at either the individual level or the social level. That's what we really want from our technology. We can combine AI with agent-based simulation to develop COVID policy. We may have pieces of data here and there, but in the past, we've usually needed humans to put all this together into a policy. However, new advances in AI, for example, deep neural networks, can be used and can be applied to principles of epidemiology to put together a mechanistic picture of how everything fits together in a scalable manner. So that's our goal. Well, first of all, what's a complex adaptive system? We know that one of the main principles of complex adaptive system is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But also, we know that we can learn more about the parts from the whole as well. And further, the parts also adapt to and change in reaction to the whole. So you really have, upper to lower interaction. And this is very important when you're talking about models of society and micro-macro integration, where you have agents at the lower level adapt to each other and the policy. And so that we know that any policy interacts with an already existing system where agents have autonomy of perception and perceive things and may not comply the way you want them to. So we want to put all those complex factors together into one system. And since they're so complex, we don't want that to run all on its own, but continually connect it to real data and have it adapt to real data so that it continually gets more and more accurate in its modeling of that data. Okay, so first we'll explore how lower level data can help an upper level interpretation and vice versa. And then after that, we'll throw adaptation into the mix. Let's start with data trackers, right? There are many data trackers used today with COVID. And we're working on products that put data together for policy that can each solve some siloed piece of the puzzle by itself. But that data alone may not tell much. Data and patterns, however, both spatial patterns and conceptual patterns, can be used to predict policy outcomes if we're careful with our methodology in handling that observational data. So one source of data is a phone and wearables. It can track where one has been and can tell if you are sick before you even have symptoms, as Ben mentioned. These facts have a lot of implications for COVID policy on several levels, if we put them together, right? Okay, so where did we get the idea about using wearables? Actually, in 2017, Dr. Michael Snyder at Stanford connected symbols from common wearables like heart rate variability, and now even oxygen levels are on this in Fitbits, and also Apple Watches and the other ones, to the body's inflammatory response, and discovered that an alert can tell you 2 or 3 days in advance before symptoms show up, right? So that's just data for one person alone. Dr. Snyder used a technique called anomaly detection to see how one's own physiological signals were off of one's own baseline. So that tells you a certain amount of data, and in fact gives you a highly sensitive but not specific signal, which we can use to constantly monitor maybe a healthcare personnel to tell if they're about to get sick 2 days in advance, and increase the pretest probability of the RT-PCR, which as Dr. Ng said, was a non-sensitive test, right? So that's a good use for these. But we can also, with all the data we have from phones, location, we can tell a lot more, and we can put that together in a more holistic picture. Okay, so if you're able to tell if you have a virus before you're sick, just from your body's own data, what can you tell from data in groups? It has a certain level of accuracy, of a certain non-specificity alone, right? Like alone, without taking anything else into account, I might know I'm about to get sick. But guess what? If I'm in the middle of a pandemic and this is a hotspot, well, then it becomes more likely that I'm sick with COVID, right? So data in groups help us to interpret the individual's data. And not just data from groups of people, but also data from different streams within the individual. So what's common in one signal and common to the other can combine to show something that's not common, right? And vice versa. One question is there some combination of data within the body, some timing of oxygen and heart rate together, that it makes it more likely that the disease is COVID than another combination, right? So if we have the upper level data, the fact that we're in a global pandemic, the fact that many people are having the same changes of signal at the same time, then we can start to find COVID signature. And if we have COVID signature, then we'll have a higher specificity for this test. And then we can use it as a better to further increase the pretest probability of the RT-PCR, which is important because healthcare workers can't do that every day, and regular people can't do that every day, but they can monitor their blood oxygen levels and their heart rate variability and the heart rate and the pattern these makes together, and check it against that signal to know if they have it. Okay, so what kind of groups can we look at? Well, of course, there's spatial groups because contagious diseases are spatial, but also, and maybe potentially more importantly, are conceptual groups. That is, persons who are under similar behavior policy regimes. How can data tell us more about the disease as well as the more fight disease based on behavior and policies? An example of the use of a spatial group to interpret signals from wearables is the Kansas Corporation heat map of unusual influenza-like events. They had an internet thermometer, which sends your temperature through the internet for public health tracking. To detect COVID-19, they just subtracted the normal flu season amount away to determine how unusual a signal was for an area, based on previous year's data. So this subtraction is a pretty simple way to analyze group data. We did the same thing to tell that the death rate from COVID was very underreported in New York City because death rates were 300% above normal, even though there were no traffic accidents in April. And we learned both something about the death rate of the disease, that's higher than we thought it was, and the forms that death can take, that COVID can really look like a heart attack or a stroke. When people looked carefully, they found that it was a really different kind of heart attack and stroke, right? So the deviation of an individual signal from the norm becomes more important if many of an individual signals deviate, which becomes more important if all the individual signal in an area deviate from that pattern. So we can use the group pattern to say something about the signal of disease so that in the future we can tell if an individual has the disease without any more input from the group. And most to note, we've done so in an unsupervised fashion without really having to confirm whether the person's had disease with an RT-PCR. So the spatial group is one that can find the signature of the disease, but we can also find that with the conceptual group. And both of these kinds of machine learnings can find the increase of pretest probability for the RT-PCR. So for one thing, we know that an antibody tests are important for determining the asymmetric rate of transmission, but sufficient data from wearables that tracks individual whereabouts and contacts and tells when they get sick can also tell you about the rate of asymmetric transmission, because it could track the likely contacts that an individual got the disease from. So where can AI and simulation come into play in this contact tracing? Well, not all data is going to be complete. If you had, lots of data, every single bit of data, you could use that to conclude with exact knowledge the asymmetric rate of transition, because you could say, oh, this individual never came near enough a symptomatic person, nor had they touched anything a symptomatic person touched. And from this, we can infer things like how long it stays on fomites and things like the asymmetric rate of transmission. But what do we do when we don't have enough data for that? usually you could work backwards to figure out the asymptotic rate of transmission until the cases that we know to exist are all best explained. You know, like assume that it's one thing and then look at what's implied by that, and does that make sense? And if not, assume another thing, et cetera, until you get the best explanation. But the AI and simulation can work to fill in the holes by filling in where the data is missing. If we could determine the plausibility that a nearby asymptomatic carrier touched the same surface another person touched, causing their infection, even if it wasn't recorded, you know, we could do that. Perhaps they go to that place often, for example, right? We didn't record that they were there, but they go to that place often. Okay, so we know that AI and simulation can fill in data. And to some, we can use a whole to tell us more about the part and vice versa. But we can use AI and simulation to go a lot farther conceptually than just filling in the spatial data. We've learned that single signals comprise patterns of multiple signals, which we can use to interpret the single signals. Multiple signals of a body comprise the patterns of the spatial and conceptual groups, which in turn can be used to interpret multiple signals. So an ongoing pandemic that's hiding in the area increases the likelihood that the deviations are caused by the pandemic. Similarly, the fact that you're using that many people who used a certain policy, like 6 feet of distance, ended up differentially better than others who use 3 feet of distance, that can tell more about the disease as well. But looking at this data and including policy is even a more complicated matter. We want to, because our goal is to learn about the disease policy, we have to take into account confounding factors. We want to know how to treat COVID, but to do this, we must tease out cause from the relevant variables. We did a limited amount of causal analysis with simple spatial tracing and subtraction, but our goal is interpreting cause by teasing out from observational data where many different factors can cause a treatment to succeed or fail. And we want to know which one. For example, what if those people who are distancing 6 feet were also doing several other policies? How do you know which of those policies is what caused them to be better off in terms of the disease?
Debbie, sorry, can I just interrupt a second?
Yes.
I was wondering if you were intending to share any slides.
Well, I was going to share the results in a notebook at the end of my talk.
Okay, so I was just wondering if you were thinking you were perhaps sharing slides and you were not. Okay, fine. You can go ahead like this. Thank you.
Okay. That's funny. Okay. Okay, so because these policies are social, we need to take into account pre-existing social systems, something we haven't talked about yet. And where individuals react in their self-interest according to their perceptions of getting the disease, not only to policy, but to others' reactions to policy. Thus, the story becomes more complicated. So we have several kinds of cause. One, the kind that says, you know, there's a confounding factor in the actual spatial policies you're playing. And the other, the kind of cause that is the cause of people changing their social behaviors, right? Because people's social behaviors are caused by their perceptions and their interactions with each other. And if you want that treatment to work on them, you have to take into account the pre-existing social system. So those are two ways that the simulation can take cause into account. And further, we need to make sure, as I said, the simulation continuously aligns with data through an adaptive process. Now, note that this is a complex adaptive system where the agents are adapting and changing their perceptions of what causes disease and their actions that they perceive to keep them safe, and also to do their other goals, like their economic goals. So it's more informative to learn person and policy types than it is to trace spatially connected individuals. To look at individual signals, not spatially, but according to the similar patterns they have regardless of space, well, instead of literal spatial contact tracing for the disease, we can detect the usual patterns that combine spatial and physiological signals to test policy. You can combine those signals to see, well, is this person standing 6 feet away? Well, that's one we know, but what about 5 feet or 7 feet? There's so many different signals, and there's so many different policies that we could learn just from observing the data. Should you stand along on trails? What if people type in what kind of mask they're wearing? You know, what types are best in meatpacking plants? So the phone and wearables can detect who is doing what where, but to make generalizations, we'll have to find the relevant variables and tease out cause from them. So to learn what's effective about a disease we really do know little about, we want to have a method that can find the most important factors amongst the thousands of possible ones, including the patterns that may apply in frequency and length of washing one's hands, you know, different patterns that you didn't think to look at. One thing that we found, that one thing that can do this is modern deep neural networks can do the feature selections themselves, and so can assist in teasing out features that are most relevant in data. Well, one thing those are not good at is finding the cause in the data, because they work through correlation, which, as we know, isn't cause. So what we've done is we've modified neural networks using something called regularization to ensure it takes into account confounding factors. That means the factors that, the other factors other than the one you're studying that could have caused a group to be better or worse at COVID. Basically, we tease out cause by finding natural experiments that hold all else the same, and use those and weigh them differently for our regularization. And then after that, what we want to do is we want to model the disease and the disease's reaction to those policies. So there's thousands of policies, thousands of things people are doing, and we want to have our neural network find those policies, find out the most relevant ones, and take into account the confounding. So we have basically a decision network, so that when we put in the state, maybe of a person, and we put in their policies, and we put in particular, their particular trail of events, like where they've been and what they've been doing that's available in their wearables, and then we put in the next action they're going to do, we want to recalculate their risk. That's what we want to do. And so this is what we would call a, if it weren't a neural network, it would be a Markov decision process, right? But a Markov decision process being something where we put a state and an action, and then we get the next state, right? Well, we can do that with our neural network. And once we have modeled the disease, we can see how people, agents that have adaptive structures, how they change their policies according to their perceptions, and how the disease reacts to their policies. Now, we wouldn't have the disease learned during the simulation itself, but we'd model it based on data before a simulation started. Then it would be put into a simulation of multiple agents, each of which was learning. They would learn not only what actions to take, but what perceptions they had, and what actions, and these actions and perceptions, all of which serve their goals, right? Their goals would include both health and wealth. Then in the system where agents react to each other, and in their reactions to each other, and their signals to each other, and they're attempting to avoid disease, at the same time they're attempting to make a living, right? And all their interactions, into this existing system, policy is placed, and you tell the agents to do this, right? And then what you want to do is, you already have that model of the disease, so you want to see, once you tell the agents to do something, if they do that, what will happen, and will they in fact do that? Because the agents value, their economic, their wealth, and they also value their health. But if they do not really believe that they will get sick, they probably won't really keep the policies or comply well, in comparison with people who are really afraid of being sick. And people who, maybe they're afraid of being sick, but they have problems with their wealth, and they know that they only have a little money. And these people may not keep some of the policies like lockdown. They might try, in fact, to find jobs that will take them out of the home. For example, in nursing homes, we know that a lot of the minimum wage workers there may hold down 2 jobs. And these 2 jobs are routes of transmission between nursing homes. So we always have to take into account the existing social system and policy, and work those things out. Now, agents are adaptive to adapt to each other, adapt to their own perceptions, and adapt to policy. But they also, as agents, adapt to data. And this is one way I like to keep my intelligence agents online and responsive, to be identical agents to agent types that exist from online and continuously updating data. Because agents adapt to each other, they can adapt to a agent that only acts according to actual data. And because they're adaptive agents, they can come to correspond to that actual data and recreate the same patterns in that actual data. And that's another line of research we have. Well, being connected closely to online data and having continuous online transmission of data from wearables can make a good complex adaptive system, which can be adjusted to that data. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And now I would like to show you our initial results using Dr. Petrino's simulation, which has been adapted for wearables, including the sensitivity and the specificity of the wearable. And it explores at what % of your of the people in a population are wearing the wearables, what % would have to wear them, and what would the sensitivity and specificity of the test would have to be in order for that to make a big difference in your policy to lift lockdown. So I would like to now show you my screen. Let's see. Okay, so where's the button, Marcello?
At the bottom, you see a green share screen icon.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay.
Yes, success.
Yay.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
see your browser. Okay, perfect. Great.
Okay, so I made a little notebook and I have modified, I forgot his name, Dr. Petronio, I'm sorry.
Petronium.
Petronio, I'm sorry, yes. I've modified this notebook to look at restricting the mobility only for infected people, including wearables. So there's two things different about it. One thing is I've added in an asymmetric versus asymptomatic versus a symptomatic period, because it was a simple model and I didn't have that. And also, I've talked about the wearable sensitivity and specificity. If someone was to wear the model consistently, then I explored how sensitive and specific would it have to be. And then what's the upshot of wearing the wearable? Would the person who had the wearable on and the wearable gave a positive reading, would that person go into isolation if there was no RT-PCR test available? Or would they just take an RT-PCR test, once or twice, and then decide? So those are different parameters you can set in the simulation. So let's go down and see. I don't know if Dr. Petronio showed his simulation, but I'll show a little bit of it. We can see here that there are different stages to the disease, including, I guess you don't see asymptomatic, but you do see symptomatic. And you can see how the increase of symptomatic persons comes later in the simulation, and how there gets to be fewer susceptibles. And then here we've got the, I don't know if you can see my arrow going around, but here's the infected persons. Now it may look like 0.4% of the simulation is a lot, but in the previous simulation I showed, it went up to here, right? So it's actually halved. And this is the one case in which, let's see where I put the, I put a sensitivity of 0.9 because all that means is it's recalling everyone who might be sick, right? It doesn't say specifically how sick. The specificity is low at 0.5. The sensitivity of the RT-PCR is, like Dr. Ng said, around 0.7, but we're just going to say it's very specific, right? And so that's what happens in that case. And the percent of people for which there are tests available is 0.8 here. So that this is with a high amount. But below, we've looked at all sorts of values for these parameters. Here, we're looking at sensitivities of 0.7, 0.9, and 1, which is like a dream world, but at least 0.7 might be right. I mean, 0.9 might be right, and 0.7, is a little less likely. And then which percentage of the population are wearing wearables? So we've tried, all combinations of these, and I've got several simulations going down there that test these things in combination. Like if there's 75% of the population is wearing a wearable, and that wearable has a sensitivity of 1.0, then you can see here that only 0.4 people get the disease in the long run. But let's see, you can see that there's other combinations that are lower. If this is a perfect world, if 100% of them were wearing the wearable and it was sensitive 100%, then it would be 0.2. And then we can go up and see that there are more non-effective combinations. Like here, it's a lot higher than 0.4. That's if nobody's wearing the wearable, and who cares about sensitivity because no one's wearing it. There's this 0.6. So the wearable made a significant difference that maybe you can put it on healthcare workers. Anyway, so that's my talk. I'd like to hear any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and I was it was failing. I guess our audience would like to know if you're going to be able to share this document right after. Is it going to be?
Absolutely, yes, sure. I'll put it right on.
Great, thank you so much. So.
But I did try to share it in Zoom once and it didn't work because it was too big. So if you could tell me how to share it, a big document, I will do it that way.
Yeah, I'm sure Ibi will have a solution for that. She's the one that works her magic in these cases.
Yeah, if I have a link to it, I can share it in the YouTube chat because that's where our community currently is.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you. Another time. I'll get that together.
Yeah, I think Debbie, you've highlighted a lot of let me get myself here. Okay. Yeah, you have highlighted a lot of important points for sort of getting from the very simple simulation models that Petronio described, which still take a lot of computer time to run and involve interaction of a lot of different types of information. But how do you get from a very simple simulation model like that to a model that really comes to grips with the full complexity of something like COVID? And I mean, you've shown a couple of the steps that are needed, and I wonder, we are about to go into the next panel, but I wonder if you could say something briefly, sort of about how in practice do we work more intelligent agents that can learn and reason and sort of interact and form cultures and so forth into this sort of model? Because clearly, like, what you've done is a little subtler than what Petronio did, but it's not quite there yet, right? So what are the next steps to get to a model of that nature?
Well, the very next steps are, well, there's two important next steps. One is make the agents adaptive to themselves and their perception adaptive, and have it based on their own utility. And secondly is connect up an online to the real data. And you might say, well, if I can hardly get, symbol agents to work, how are we going to fit, intelligence agents and lots of them together? Well, we have some ways of dealing with that too. One is we use the existing data to make robotic agents that just act according to simple rules, and have the learning agents adapt to them and then adapt to each other so that they come to reflect the vicious and virtuous cycles that created their society from data into the simulation data. And once we have those patterns correctly, we can make them robotic again. And so we can have a lot more of them because that's a lot simpler. They don't have to be adaptive anymore. Then see how those spin out, make a lot of them and see what are the social level patterns that come out of that. So that's a trick. But the two important things again are that the agents are adaptive to each other and to the policy, and that you've teased out cause correctly from the data, that you've used the correct observational principles of epidemiology to tease out the cause and take into account confounding, so that you will not double count things and just make a ridiculously complex adaptive system that doesn't work.
Well, great. Yeah, thanks, Debbie. And I think we are now about to diverge into the next panel. So yeah, let's thank Debbie, everyone, for bringing us deep into the technical depths of intelligent agent-based simulation. Hopefully we'll manage to escape with some modicum of sanity.